You're watching Public Affairs. Berkowitz is my name, and politics is our game. And we will be doing lots of politics and public policy and pop culture, because we have as our guest Eric Zorn from the Chicago Tribune columnist. Eric, that's what you do, writing for the Chicago Tribune, writing your blog. You also have a Facebook separate page, is that right?
Well, sort of. I mean,
so many things going on.
I have Facebook. I have Google Plus now. I have Twitter. But I do most of my.
Nobody can read all that you write. I mean, you can't keep. They would have to quit their job.
Well, it might free up some jobs for others. I don't. You know, the most of my stuff is on the blog, and most stuff is related to the blog. My column appears there. My one-off thoughts appear there. The conversations I have with readers appear there. So.
Okay, so it's the chicagotribune.com/Zorn. Right?
Yes.
Okay.
Or backslash.
So you can find most of it just by going there.
Right, it's all there.
And Zorn, Eric Zorn, he would be the father of blogging. He pretty much started most in Chicago. You were really instrumental.
Among Chicago journalists, yeah. I mean, there were bloggers in Chicago before. I was the first one at any major local publication to blog. So.
But the question everybody's been dying to ask is, you heard the saying that I think it was Bob Novak said that God put Republicans on earth to cut taxes.
Bob Novak said this?
He said,
the late
Bob Novak. And Eric Zorn's saying would be God put Democrats on earth to raise tax rates?
To raise tax rates?
Yeah.
Or,
is that what you expect?
God put Republicans on earth to protect the rich?
No.
I don't quite understand the premise of his question. I think
Did God put Democrats on this earth to raise tax rates?
Well, I mean, if you want to talk about why we have these two parties,
you are a unionist, you know, so you can have thoughts about
right.
this,
Okay,
right?
but we can talk about what do the various parties tend to stand for. I mean, if that seems to be Novak's point. If you say Democrats stand for raising taxes, then I'll turn around and say, well, Republicans stand for protecting the rich. And I don't know if that's the kind of thing that Novak's talking about.
That's sort of a pejorative. I mean,
so is Novak's quote.
No, but he didn't say that about putting Democrats to raise tax. I've added that. Novak said God put Republicans on this earth to lower taxes.
He said lower taxes.
Lower taxes. Did I mistake that just
now?
now?
No, I guess I would say that when you look at the various parties, you want to say, well, if I want to put the best spin on what the Democratic Party stands for, I mean, it stands for...
Not the best spin. Give me a truthful statement. What do you think, in one sentence, the Democratic Party stands for?
In one sentence. Okay, I think the Democratic Party stands for protecting the working class and the middle class from the ups and downs and ravages of free market capitalism. That's certainly one of the things that the Democratic Party stands for. It protects the rights stands for the rights of minorities and dispossessed people and discriminated against people from being run over by the will of the majority in this country often.
So it stands for, in large part, helping low-income people and minorities?
And middle-income people too, working-class people, not just low-income people.
They're not going to be run over by majorities, since 80% of people say they're middle class.
Well, working people can be. Yeah, it's interesting how we got to 80% of the people being middle class. I think a lot of that had to do with the labor movement and other things that the Democratic Party pushed.
We're a little bit off on this. We're taping the show on July 31st, the year 2011. And as we're taping, various people have said we're 2 days away from catastrophe, from a cataclysmic decision by the Republicans and the Democrats not to reach an agreement on raising the debt limit, if you want to call it that. That's the decision. And that if they can't reach a decision in 2 days, I don't know, the Earth will stop. So, Eric Zorn, is that accurate? Will the Earth stop?
As much as I know about how the world economy works, it seems like the Earth won't stop, but they're going to have a huge problem with the crisis in confidence in the American economy and the crisis in confidence in the American political system.
Because the U.S. government now has a budget of almost $4 trillion, 3.8, and 40 cents of that 40 cents on a dollar that they spend is borrowed. It gives us a deficit on a monthly basis, the federal government, about $300,000. And they get $170,000 in, I guess, and they borrow $130,000.
Right.
So they'd have to, over the course of that month, and the money comes in at different times, if nothing else happened, they'd have to cut spending, by about $130,000. So they'd either have to default on they can't borrow anymore, and so some interest comes due, and they won't be able to meet those interest payments, and there are other spending that they'll have to cut. So that's the crux of the problem, but it's not like the Earth will stop. They might actually have to prune down some things and decide what are the most important things to spend on until they can reach agreement. That's sort of what you think?
Well, I think you're making it sound like it's a minor shortfall, and the debt ceiling is a minor problem. I mean, the way
no, I don't mean to say that. A lot of people who rely on Social Security, who rely on Medicaid, rely on Medicare, could very well be affected because they could be within the group that was that spending was cut. In fact, the Defense Secretary, the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, was asked just a few days ago by a soldier if the debt limit isn't raised, will these soldiers who are fighting in Afghanistan and Iraq for the United States, for you and me and others, will they be paid? And I think the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff said he didn't know.
Right. I don't think we do know at this point who's going to be paid.
So I don't mean to minimize that, but
well, I think, but you do sound like you want to minimize the effect.
It's not like a nuclear bomb's going to happen. That would be a little bit more devastating, wouldn't it?
It's not a nuclear bomb, but if our credit rating gets lowered, if cost of borrowing goes up, that's going to be a huge drag on an economy that's already struggling. I mean, all I know. I mean, I read what the economists are saying about this, and many of them, including many people who are conservative economists, Republican economists, are saying this is a real problem. You saw, on the talk shows, you saw a lot of Republicans, sort of the more responsible, serious Republicans in the Senate, saying this isn't going to happen. It can't happen. Now, I don't know if they're wrong.
Most likely it won't, because the incumbents, whether it's your incumbent president, which your incumbent Democrat or Republican, have an incentive to work things out, because people are going to be upset if this happens. More people will be upset than happy, and so these folks, one would anticipate, number one, it's not a disaster, it's not a nuclear disaster. Two, it's very unlikely to occur.
Well,
you would agree with me.
I agree. Yeah, and of course, when we're taping,
who knows? It seems very close to an agreement now.
It seems close to an agreement, and it's also important to remember, I think, that this is an artificial ceiling. It's an artificial deadline. It's an artificial crisis in some ways.
It's not an artificial ceiling. The law has set a limit on how much
debt it's arbitrary, and they should get rid of it. It's ludicrous. It's like
you shouldn't have a debt limit.
No, I don't think you should. Why would you have a debt limit?
Because you don't want the,
you have Congress to set debt limits.
How much debt do the United States have now?
They
$14 trillion. Do you think it should be, if they wake up and decide they want to issue bonds and make it $28 trillion, they should be allowed to do it? Well, you could trust these guys, you think?
We've had debt limits and we've not had debt limits. I believe we're the only country in the world that has a debt limit. Maybe there's one other one that does. I think you elect
a lot of things we have. We have freedom that many other
you elect
countries
representatives
don't have.
who have the freedom not to raise spending. Okay. You have. I mean, what I'm saying is that this is. I mean, okay. I'm opposed to term limits. I'm opposed to balanced budget amendments. I'm opposed to things that try to make legislatures do what they are supposed to do anyway. Right? I mean,
there's a constitution. You're not opposed to having a United States Constitution, are you?
I'm not at all opposed to that. But
because that, as you said, protects minority groups from the majority overwhelming them with things that are not
often
good.
In many cases,
so you agree you can't rely completely on the majority, right?
Right, sure.
So why can you rely completely on a majority vote to, oh, this person's been elected for 30 years to Congress. That must be damn good because he's been elected 14 times.
We have term
Why
limits.
is that obviously good?
We have term limits. It's a
vote
vote
every 2 years. But I'm saying you put in things in the Constitution that will not be subject to a majority. We have a 2-term limit for President of the United States, right? We don't allow this country to do what they did with FDR, elect him 4 times.
And I'm not only opposed. I'm opposed to that amendment, and I'm baffled as to why the parties agreed to pass that amendment. I don't know the history.
What about the First Amendment? Is that a good amendment?
That's a good amendment.
Okay.
That's a nice
you like
one.
freedom of speech.
I do.
You like making sure that the Congress does not pass any laws that abridge freedom of speech or the right to exercise choice in terms of what religion people have, or that Congress doesn't establish a religion. All those things are good, right?
I think they're pretty good, yeah.
And yet, you wouldn't trust the majority in this country not to do something to take those rights away, because that's why we have the First Amendment,
That's why they're there.
Okay, so is it conceivable to you that there might be other things that we shouldn't trust the majority to do?
Even something as fine-tuned as government spending, I don't think that a law should say we're going to set this debt limit and then we're going to crash into it and create this potential crisis when there's no reason for that. We could have had all these discussions about lowering the debt ceiling, lowering spending, tax reform. All these discussions can be had without this artificial debt ceiling.
We weren't having.
What? Well, so
that's a useful.
The
thing.
voters.
That is a useful thing of this debt ceiling, is that we're having this discussion.
It's like people who wire their jaws shut because they can't stop eating so much, and that's how they lose weight.
It's a question of whether you can respect, you can rely on the Congress, the people we elect, but not necessarily the ones that you and I would personally choose.
Give me an
You
example.
can't rely on these folks to do the sensible thing.
Give me an example in the
They
Constitution.
can't be trusted.
Give me an example of something in the Constitution that simply restricts the power of Congress, that doesn't rely on protecting people from from untoward actions of a majority. Is there anything that, I mean, when we're looking at the First Amendment, you're looking at someone saying, this is a minority person speaking out, and we are acting to make sure that the majority doesn't simply suppress them because they don't like their ideas. That is like completely separate from the idea that you're talking about of setting this artificial line, saying we can't spend more than this, and then they raise it. How many times did they raise it? 51 times in the last 3 decades? I mean, they just set it and raise it and set it and raise it.
We do it on the local level, something quite similar. We have things called tax caps. And we say that you cannot, this board that you elected, say the local school board, they can't be trusted to limit the tax increases. And so if you want a tax increase in excess of 5% or the consumer price index, whichever is greater, if you want, or less, whichever way it works, if you want to do that, you can, but you have to go to a referendum, okay?
So
the basic thing is they can't trust the governing board that they elected, and that's an example. You want an example? That's a basic example.
That's not constitutional. That's just a local. That's just a
local
law.
But it's the attempt. The Constitution tries to do the same thing. It tries to restrain people who you've elected from doing something that you don't think you can trust them not to do.
And these tax caps periodically create these crises, like in California, where you have these incredible things get way out of bounds because these things have all kinds of unintended consequences. I mean, I'm the one who's sitting here arguing for just the basic power of representative democracy when it comes to taxing and spending. You know, we elect people to do that, and if they don't
arguing
do
for a constitution,
and if they don't,
you're the one who's
arguing for laws coming in saying, okay, you guys can make some decisions, but only to a certain extent. We're going to block your power to tax and spend. My feeling is that in a free society, we ought to be able to freely elect these legislators who can go in and make these decisions about taxings, and if we don't like them, we can vote the bums out, right? I mean, that's democracy,
the basic thing
right?
we're talking about
No one's rights are trampled by that.
As of July 31st, the core issue, we're not going to spend much of this show on this debt increase, but it does, to me, it's symbolic of a division within this country, of a major division that divides largely Republicans and Democrats, or conservatives and liberals, or people who think we need to be spending more and have a larger federal government, and people who think we need to be spending less and having a smaller federal government. And that leads us to, how has Barack Obama done in the last 2.5 years? Was he elected to expand government, as it seems he thinks?
How's he expanded government exactly?
How has he expanded government? Well, the deficit has gone from, it was thought to be when Bush was there, a real major concern when it was about
That's not government, that's the deficit. I'm going to talk about
the government spending has gone up. I think domestic spending in the first 2 years, went up about 28%.
And for what new programs? Has he started any?
I don't know. He had a stimulus program for $800 billion that didn't really stimulate.
Well, a lot of people thought it was because
it was too small. A lot of
people thought it was too small.
And would that be you? You think we should have done it more?
I don't know. I mean, I certainly have read enough informed opinions saying that one of the problems with the stimulus was that it was too small and had too much tax cuts in it, and it had too many things that were going to local governments rather than actually trying to stimulate the economy in the ways that we know that it can be. I mean, there's certainly a lot of
who put it together? The Democrats had the presidency, the Democrats had the House, and the Democrats had the Senate.
Right.
So who put together this bill that Obama really didn't want? Apparently, he didn't want. He'd like to have maybe larger spending. He'd like to have different kinds of spending. No Republicans voted for that thing. And you're telling me, so what? Who is responsible for that being a mess?
Well, Obama.
It seems like either the Democratic House, Democratic Senate, or Barack Obama.
Obama backed down. I mean, he was facing. I mean, one of the things is that Republicans, you can't act like the Democrats could have done whatever they wanted to.
Pretty much.
They had you read about the Senate. You know how the Senate works.
Yeah, they had 60 votes.
They did not have 60 votes in the Senate. They may have had 60 representatives, but they didn't have 60 votes.
How many votes did they get on the stimulus?
I don't remember.
But you're saying 2 or 3. As you recall, Collins voted for that. Olympia Snowe voted for that. Some other Republican voted for that.
They voted for the $800 billion stimulus.
They did.
Right.
But on health care, they didn't. Is that right?
Could they have got?
Did they vote for health care too?
It wasn't health care. They had 59 votes at that time. They had lost Massachusetts at that point, right? They had 59 votes in the Senate. I mean, the thing is that they were up against I mean, the Democrats were not unified on this. It wasn't like the party was in lockstep, just like the Republicans aren't unified right now in the debt situation.
Right, because they were afraid in some of the conservative states that some of the Democrats who were elected as moderates, so-called moderate Democrats.
Well, I won't dispute
they
that
were afraid if they supported the stimulus, if they supported the bailout, if they supported Obamacare, they might lose, and that's the way it looks now.
I would not say that. Yeah, I mean, I certainly.
So what does that tell you about the country? Was the country's mood to do all those things?
I think the country was certainly divided. I'm not sure that. I mean, when you look at something like, say, I mean, when you look at what the public wants, it was a pretty interesting graphic this morning on Meet the Press, where they showed that something like 66% of the public wants a balanced budget amendment, and 66% of the people want, all at the same time, about the similar percentage, they also want a combination of tax cuts and of tax reform and spending cuts.
The polling is difficult to say that shows you what people want.
To say, and I'm not saying
we could say this: in 2008, people were very upset with the Republicans and George Bush, and the wars going longer than they thought, the economy turning down. So they elected Democrats. They elected a Democratic president, a majority in the House and Senate. Okay, we can say in 2010, it appears that the country had some misgivings.
Yeah, absolutely. They
Maybe
did.
Buyer's remorse. Okay, because they then overwhelmingly elected a Republican majority in the House, and the Democrats, while continuing to have control in the Senate, lost seats. So now what we're set up for in 2012 is an election where we expect the Republicans will have somebody there that provides a sharp contrast to Barack Obama. And this country will choose. And so in a sense, this thing about a grand deal that they were trying to have for the debt limit and all that, it's premature. That's the 2012 election. Why have people, we keep setting up these special commissions of 12 people or the Gang of Six. Why have these people decided? Often they're not even people who've been elected. Why do we want, and all these discussions that Obama has, they're in back rooms. What the hell's going on here? Wasn't he supposed to be elected that this guy was a Democrat with a small d? Why should everything be done? Remember, he was going to do everything about healthcare in C-SPAN. And so now everything is done in the Oval Office with a few Republican leaders and a few Democratic
Well,
leaders.
I mean, certainly what's
and
happened.
And some group decides where we'll cut things.
Well, certainly, what
So
has
that's something
happened?
gone wrong?
Well, no, I mean, I think what's gone wrong is that like every politician who tries to make people make tough choices or looks into the possibility of asking people to make tough choices, they realize that the public doesn't want to make tough choices. My colleague Steve Chapman made an excellent point this morning, which is that everyone wants government spending to be cut. They just don't want the spending that they benefit from to be cut. And as soon as you start going at programs that are popular, people start howling, and you look at those.
Completely true, you know. But you hear
almost completely true.
Paul Ryan,
what's a popular
the Republicans and the Paul Ryan, you'd have to say, acted as adults when they came up with a budget plan and a long-term plan to cut spending.
Well,
and it cut Medicare, and it cut it cut Medicare. It talks about reforming Social Security. What is the first thing? Tell me, what is the first thing the Democrats did in response to that?
Just because, well, I'll tell you, but I'll say
no, just answer that question. Then you can
they
go
did
on.
an ad about pushing grandma off a cliff in a wheelchair.
They would do Medicare stuff, and they're scaring about Social Security.
But they should have scared them because.
So don't give me this. Everybody does this.
It's not
the Democrats are doing the same old game.
It's not but he's on the fringe.
Paul Ryan was not on the fringe.
He is now. No one talks about him running for president. No one talks about him as a vice president.
Yeah, people do.
Oh, they do.
You haven't heard about Rubio Ryan?
Yes.
Dream
on. I mean, look at. Have you seen the polling on Medicare and Medicaid?
Because they didn't portray it right, and the timing may have been
portrayed it honestly.
The point is, they
turned into a coupon
the
program.
Republicans were inept as usual, but they were trying. You, being the impartial guy I know you are, you should be saying, yeah, they made an effort. They should do that. Democrats should make an effort. This would be good government.
That was
You're a goo-goo. Why aren't you a
He was throwing a nuclear bomb onto Medicare and Medicaid. He basically wants to turn it into a coupon program.
So now what we're left?
I think it's certainly a good debate to talk about how do we reduce health care costs. You talk to people who are healthcare economists, they say the problem in this country is spiraling healthcare costs out of control. We have to get those under control.
Because the people who receive the benefits don't pay for it.
Right. Well, we have to
redesign things, not to make the government the sole provider, the sole purchaser, and all that stuff. We have to somehow figure out how to inject competition in here, make people who receive the benefits care something about the costs, so they will choose things or not. You know, whether the benefits exceed the
talked
costs.
About a contrast.
You understand that?
You talked about a contrast to Obama in 2012. The leading Republican right now is Mitt Romney, who is trying somehow to parse the difference
away
between
from his
healthcare
in
plan,
Massachusetts.
which if you read the
He's a
recent
problem.
New
It's a
Yorker
problem.
profile of Romney, talking about in great detail how he celebrated the passage of Romney Care and how he talked about it was a model for the nation, and now he is dancing away from it. I don't know, that is, if you've got one thing that people can really hook into Obama about, this confusion, anger about the Affordable Care Act is one that is there.
Well,
but if you run Romney, what does Romney really say that makes any sense?
What he says is that Obama said if we did a stimulus, unemployment would not go above 8%, and he'll say it's been above 9% for 2 years possibly.
And
at
they
that
say,
point.
Mr. Romney, that's not the question. The question is,
no, and he'll turn it around and say, talk to any voters and say, what do they want? They want people to be employed in this country. Obama has failed on that. Screw health care is essentially what they say. We'll work that out, but first people have to have jobs.
We'll work that out.
That is Romney's hope. If he can't do that, then you got Rick Perry, who doesn't have the Obama health care problem, may have some others. And if those two guys screw it up, then there's Marco Rubio, who if we can get away from this thing, people raised ethical things that didn't pan out when he was running for the U.S. Senate, but they will be doing it again. If we can start acting like mature adults and say, what are I actually heard a debate. We're taping this on the 31st, so it was on the 30th, on Saturday. The Senate was actually doing, as a result of this national debt limit thing, they were actually doing something they're supposed to do, have real debates. Here was Marco Rubio and John Kerry, Democrat John Kerry, Republican Marco Rubio, Rubio from Florida, Kerry from Massachusetts. If John Kerry had acted like that when he ran for president, the way I saw him yesterday in the debate, he'd be president. He was sitting there just talking, using his intelligence, which is substantial, and having a dialogue. And so was Marco Rubio. And this is what we used to have in this country, senators who would engage in debate in the deliberate body. Now what we have, because we have all these do-gooders finding ethical problems and so forth, and how much money somebody had spent, or somebody gave you money, we don't give a rat's ass about how well Kerry and Rubio know the issues and discuss the issues and come up with plans. We want to know who gave money to this guy, and it's some corporation. Well, it's going to be a terrible thing.
Well, yeah, you got Mitch Daniels.
Or how much did he spend? Oh, it's a terrible thing.
Well, and you have Mitch Daniels.
Nobody talks about what I'm talking about, right?
You have Mitch Daniels bowing out because I think Mitch Daniels bowed out because he didn't want to put his family through all the inspection of his marital problems over the years.
And you agree with me? It's ridiculous.
I think that's ridiculous. I think that someone's ability to govern I'm not a big Mitch Daniels fan, but I think that that's a bad reason for him to have to bow out. So
we're in agreement. This country needs to get unemployment down, get employment up, stop worrying about the stuff that's not relevant, really stop debating balanced budget amendments. I mean, I know, written about this and saying you'd like to see what expert economists actually might have to say. I think we'd find that they don't say it's the greatest idea in the world. That really what you want to do, if they're the conservative economists and believe in the free market, is restrain government spending. So if you have a balanced budget amendment, you have to have, that plus something that restrains spending. You can have the government spending $8 trillion and have taxes $8 trillion, and that would not be good. And I'm told the balanced budget amendment, I haven't read it, actually has something like that. So in addition to a balanced budget, it's also going to restrain or set caps on spending by the federal government, which I think is a good idea.
I just think it's a bad idea. I think your government has to be able to respond to crises. It has to be able to respond to disasters and wars. It has to be able to. It has to have more flexibility, and it can't keep running. A state can run into these problems because the state isn't charged with national defense. Because almost every state has some sort of balanced budget requirement in its constitution, which they, of course, routinely get around with all kinds of strange tricks. I mean, I don't know where balanced budget provisions have shown themselves to be effective. I mean, they're certainly not like a panacea, and they're sold to people as like, well, you and your spouse sit around the table and you balance your budget. Well, in fact, most of us are in quite a bit of debt, with our homes and so on.
Okay, so let's switch gears, going from the federal to the city. City of Chicago here, Mayor Rahm Emanuel. Has he kept his promise?
Well, he made a whole bunch of them. Which promise are you talking about?
What were the three major promises he said?
I don't know. He said he put up.
What did he imply? What do people care about? They said they want the streets to be safer, they want education to improve, and they want the city's finances to be sound. If you can do that, you're a successful mayor, right?
Right, and he's had about, 100 days or something like that?
75 days. 75 days. But is he on the path to doing that? Because he's saying, he just said the other day, this was an amazing thing. He said the unions now recognize competition is here, and to get something, they have to compete. wow, I haven't heard the union say that, but if they said that to him, I'd say that's pretty damn good.
Did you read the union's document?
Yeah, some improvements and some things they want. I know you liked it because it said that they could be, they want to assess performance, find out what people are supposed to be doing, and are they doing
well,
that?
the idea of having a performance review. One of the
Sure, they want to do everything that distracts people from the idea that these folks are getting above market wages.
Well,
so let's have any discussion, as admirable as you point out.
I mean, I'm in favor of that. I'm in favor of that thing too. I mean, I'm a big fan
you?
of Joe Ferguson, the city inspector general, who is
put everything up for bid.
Who is not put everything.
Legal services, should they be put up for bid, or should we decide that everything goes to Cat and Mugen because now they have Mayor Daley there as a partner? And actually, he's got half his old staff there, right?
I think he guys, Jackie Hurd certainly. I don't know if he's
got
half his old
well,
staff.
Well, got 2 other people there, I think.
But
he's building an empire there.
I believe that Ferguson is on the right path. That we need to be relentless in looking at efficiencies in the city government, and I think that Emmanuel has made a good start in 75 days, if that's the number, in doing that sort of thing. Education, I think it's far too early to tell. I saw Terry Mazzani last night, and
it's not too far too early because we've got Mary Ann Ahern here to highlight a major issue for us, right?
But what I'm saying is I think I was skeptical. I am skeptical about whether Brizard, Jean-Claude Brizard, the new superintendent, is the guy for the job. But people who I trust, including Terry Mazzani, who was the former CEO who came in and did it for $1 a year. I talked to him last night, and he was telling me that he felt that Brizard has got the right chops to do this. Are
they going to expand charter schools significantly? Right now, about 8% of the kids in the CPS go to charter schools.
I don't.
How about if they? Do you think they could put 30,000 in there in the first year?
I don't
think
think
so.
I certainly doubt it. In the first year, I doubt that very
2
much.
2 years, 3 years,
2 or 3 years, maybe. And I would like to see at least some more good, solid research on what these charter schools are doing.
There's plenty of solid research. Come on, now you've seen it. It's there.
Some of them, and some of them not. Is every charter school outperforming public schools?
You know, here's a book. Why don't you take a look at it? School Choice, okay? Herb Wahlberg compiles really quite a few. It's yours. Quite a few. Read all those findings and tell me. He's done a survey of findings. Tell me there's not substantial evidence that charter schools do not outperform public schools, even when the kids are drawn from the same pool. Because Carolyn Huxby and others have studied this and say that when the kids come from the apply to charter schools and you choose by lottery, okay, so that you choose people who have the same parents, the same drive, and so forth. Some go to a charter school, some go to a public school. Yet the charter schools outperform those going to the public schools.
Well,
so you can't say it's the parents there because they're the same parents, same pool of parents that we're drawing from. The people who apply and got in are the same as the people who applied and didn't get it. You see my point?
Right, I see your point. What I am saying, though, is that I know there's a substantial amount of research that shows that these voucher programs and these charter programs have some successes, but some places where they're not all that successful.
Mary Ann asked about Rahm Emanuel. He's sending his kids to the private school, University of Chicago Lab School, not to the public school. But the point should not be that that's bad. That's fine if he wants to do that. But shouldn't Rahm give similar choice as much as he can to all the parents in the Chicago public schools? Give them the $15,000 we're spending per year in the Chicago public schools and say, you want to stay in the public school? That's fine. You want to go to a private school? That's fine too. If he does that, then Rahm could send his kids to any school.